Okay, today we're going to talk about the origins of Rabbi Akiva, the way they are describing the Gemara, and how he departed from his house after he got married to go learn in the yeshiva. But I want to see it in context, meaning it's the fourth story in the Gemara in a series of stories about rabbis who left their home to go study Torah and spend a long period outside the house. So this is part of a discussion in the Gemara regarding the commitment that the husband has towards his wife in terms of conjugal relationships. So how long the Torah sees it as an obligation, the Rabbi says an obligation for a husband and wife to have sexual relationships, but there are certain different periods. The Gemara says, "Po'alim Shabbat Ahad," someone who works hard physical work is committed to once a week. Then the Tayalim Hamarim Ahad B'Shabbat, people who travel, Gamalim, people who travel with camels, caravans, once a month. Asapanim Ahad L'Shisha Chodashim, and sailors see their wives only once in 6 months. Now, the Gemara says, אמר רב זאת דברי רבי אליעזר, אבל החכמים אומרים, התלמידים יוצאים לתלמוד תורה 2 ו3 שנים שלא ברשות. So according to Rabbi Eliezer, even a scholar at the Mitchacham, a rabbi, has to be home every week, once a week at least. Maybe people used to travel to yeshivot, says he must be back home once a week and be with his wife. But Rabbi Hachamim say the Talmidim, people who study in yeshivot, could go for 2 and 3 years without asking permission from their wives. Strange, right? They don't have to ask for permission. If he wants to leave her behind for 2 or 3 years, he could do that. Amar Rava, Samchu Rabbanan Aderav Adabar Ahava ve'avdei Uvda benafshayu. Rava is not happy with that. He said some people relied, and it's interesting because it was ruled as halakha. But Rava says this is not the right thing to do. He says, I know people who did that and were punished by heaven. He brings an example. Was this rabbi who used to study Torah with Rava, with the same rabbi who said that. And so probably it was not agreed upon by his rabbi, but he decided that he goes home only once a year on Erev Kippur. And remember, back then there's no means of communication. Maybe he sends a letter, but he would go home only once a year, Erev Kippur. So 1 year, had Yomah had Meshachtesh Ma'ata. But 1 year it was Erev Kippur, and he was about to leave home, but he got carried away with the learning. He was learning a very deep subject, and all of a sudden when he looks not at the watch, he looks outside, it's too late, he has no time to travel home. He wouldn't make it on time for Kippur. So he stays in the yeshiva. Meanwhile, his wife, Hava Mesachia Devitu, his wife is watching. She sits outside and looking at the road to see if he's coming. If it's not, it's him, it's not him. And of course, she's very very sad and distressed. La'ata, and eventually he didn't come. Halash da'ata, nahit dim'ata me'ina, and she was so sad that she started crying. As she was crying, havayativ be'igra, ifhit igra mitute v'nach nafshe. And at that time, he was sitting at the second floor of the house. The moment she cried, a beam broke under him and he fell and he died. It's an interesting story. So we know it's like if it exactly happened the way it's described, the message is, in any case, that, she didn't gain from it, obviously, because now she's a widow. But maybe the message of the story is that for her it was not worth it to have a husband who's not home, and anyway she lives like a widow. And also that if someone causes heartache to another person, he will eventually have to pay, even if it's indirectly. So Rava says this is not recommended to travel for long periods and leave your wife behind. Not recommended. But then the Gemara brings several stories of people who did do that. So it's interesting, sort of like trying to contradict Rava. The first story is this, about the son of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, I'asak le'libre bei Rabbi Yosef ben Zimra, he engaged his son to the daughter of Rabbi Yosef ben Zimra. Pasku le'tarte sarei shanin le'meizal bevei Rav. And it was agreed that before the wedding, he will spend 12 years in the yeshiva. Meaning engagement now go study for 12 years. It's more than college. 12 years. Some rabbis argue that he was engaged at 18 and was supposed to get married at the age of 30. And that probably was the age of marriage at the time of the Talmud. People married around 27, 30, not as we think as youngsters, because they had to learn, to have a profession, and okay. So he agrees. The groom or the fiancé agrees to go and study 12 years. But his future father-in-law tricked him and told the girl, "Go." He didn't see her. It was just prearranged. But the father of the bride says, "Go pass by your future husband." So she passed by him. He goes to his father, says, "You know that I don't think 12 years is too much. Maybe 6 years." It says, "Okay, 6 years," because he wants to get married already. So then she passed in front of him again. He says, "You know what? I should get married first and then go to yeshiva." And meaning that it was very difficult. What a commitment to go for 12 years, and what's the point of even getting married? But he was embarrassed to tell his father that, because he thought his father wants him to first go study. The father comforted him. He says, "No, this is exactly what Hashem wants to do. מעיקרא כתיב תביאמו ותטעמו, ולבסוף כתיב ועשו לי מקדש ושכנתי בתוכם." The Torah says first come to Eretz Israel and settle down, and then build a temple. Meaning, coming and settling down is like getting married. Building the temple is the spiritual aspect of going to yeshiva. So fine. So he decided to do that. But here's the strange part. Azil yativ tarte sarei shaneh bevei Rav, ad de'ata i'akra devitru. So he went and spent 12 years at the yeshiva. By the time he came back, his wife was already barren. She was sterile, she couldn't have children. And they thought it was related to that, because as Rashi says, that a woman who is not married for 10 years, well, it's not science, but this is the science of the time. So we'll stick to that. So now he comes back, and his wife cannot have children. She's barren. His father says, "Echin avid nigarsha yomru aniya zo lashav shimra." He says, if he will give her a divorce, because they married 10 years and she cannot have children, if he will divorce her, they will say, "This poor woman waited for her husband for 10 years and now only to be divorced." But he wants to have children. Ninsav iteta harita. But he'll let him marry someone else, a second wife. Yomru zo ishto vezo zonato. Harsh word. They say, if he marries a second wife, people say, "Oh, he has one wife for business, like to have children, and one for pleasure." Almost like a prostitute. It's not good. So since he was Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, apparently he had powers beyond what we have. He prayed for her and she was cured and she had children. Okay, story number 1. Number 2. Rabbi Hananiah ben Hachina is another rabbi. Havaka azile be'rav b'shilhei iluled Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Rabbi Hananiah ben Hachina, this rabbi, Rabbi Hananiah, not our Hananiah ben Hakashia, a different one, was going to the yeshiva while Rabbi Shimon was getting married and his party was winding down. Rabbi Shimon told Rabbi Hananiah, "Wait for me, I'll go with you." He says, No, I have to go now. Okay, so he went, spent 12 years, again 12 years. He comes back home after 12 years, he doesn't know the city, the whole place was changed. The Department of Public Works was doing something, anyway, he doesn't know where his house is. So what did he do? He went and he sat at the bank of the river, because all the women come there to wash laundry and to get water. So as he was sitting there, he heard the ladies calling one of the girls, "Bat Hachinai, come here." So that's his name. So he realized it's his daughter. So he followed her home. to see, and then finally he found his house. He comes home, Hava yativa divitu kana'ala kimha, dal aina hazite, save liba parahuha. So she was sitting at the door, sifting flour, and he came and stood in front of her. She looked at him, she passed out. She passed away actually. Because she was so shocked. It's like a heart attack, we don't know, she died. So, the second story, the men spent 12 years in the first story, the wife becomes barren, the second one, she dies. But here also, the husband says, Ribono shel olam, this is a reward for waiting for me. He prays for her, and she revives. She comes back to life. Finally, we have another story. Rabbi Haim Ovadia, the third story that we have, and each one, by the way, is of a later period. So we're going in a chronological order. Each story comes from a little later period, and this rabbi spent 12 years, comes back home, and he already knows the story of the rabbi whose wife passed away. He's not sure that he will be able to revive his wife. He doesn't want to get into trouble. So he goes to the Bet HaMidrash, and he sits there, and he sends a message home, tell my wife that I'm here. Instead of his wife comes a young boy, 12 years old, and it's his son. But he didn't know that when he left, his wife was already pregnant. So he never knew that he has a son, he never saw his son. His son comes and sits there, and starts talking to the father about Torah and Halakha and all that. And the son is so brilliant that the father now, not knowing that it's his son, becomes very, very depressed. He said, if I had a son, if I would have stayed here and had a son, my son could have been at this age and a learned person. So he leaves the son in the Bet HaMidrash and goes home. After they told him, your wife got the message, you could come home, so he comes home. He says hi to his wife, they sit together, and then the son comes in. And the father is surprised. He doesn't even associate this young boy with his wife. So he gets up to honor a scholar, Tamid Hacham. His wife says, Mi'ika Abba dekaim kameh bereh. I have never seen a father who gets up for the son. So then he realized that it's his own son. And they said there was a tremendous achievement that his father was also a great scholar, so it's sort of like it stays in the family. But here, so this is the third story in the Gemara. Like we have now 3 stories of rabbis who went to learn for 12 years, and when they come back, there's some entanglement with their wife or their family. Finally, we have this story. Rabbi Akiva, Ra'yad ben Kalba Savua Ava. Rabbi Akiva was a shepherd for a very, very wealthy man named Kalba Savua. Hazite Barte Davat Saniya U'Me'aleh, and the daughter of that wealthy man saw that Rabbi Akiva was a modest person and he had good qualities. Amra le'im ekadashna lach azlat leveirav. If I get engaged to you, would you go to the yeshiva? This is in this version of the story, by the way. If you heard the story that Rabbi Akiva was an ignoramus and he knew nothing, this is not the version. And according to this version, he's someone who would want to learn, but had to work. And she says, "Go to the yeshiva." So he said yes. She got married to him in hiding. It was not a big party. It was only with the witnesses. And she sent him away. Meanwhile, her father heard that, got very upset, deprived her of all of his possessions. And then he went and he spent 12 years, and we spoke about this story, right? He spent 12 years, he comes back with 12,000 students. Very surprisingly, he comes with 12,000 students to his city, and his wife doesn't know about that. Nobody knows that he comes with 12,000 students, and he catches her by surprise. But this time, she doesn't see him. He just hears her talking to a neighbor from behind the wall, meaning that they were with all 12,000 people there. Came to the house, and he puts his ear on the door and he's eavesdropping, and he hears her talking with the neighbor, and the neighbor says, "Well, you're a widow. You are practically a widow. Why are you waiting for your husband?" And the wife says, "If he listens to me, he should go for another 12 years." So he turns around and goes with the 12,000 students and comes back 12 years later with 24,000 people. So this, of course, is obviously it's an exaggeration. Just I mean, like, for the practical reason that there's no way that in Israel of the time you would be able to travel. I mean, even today, think about it: a march of 12,000 people. If 12,000 people would have started marching, from the other side of the continent here, we would have heard about it before they would come here. How is it possible in Eretz Israel that people didn't know about that? So it's really strange. In any case, once this was done, once he came with 24,000 people, she comes towards him, and she goes to greet him. אמרו לה שביבתה, שאלי מנה לבוש ויחסי. They told her, you're dressed with rags. Borrow from someone something decent to wear when you go to see your husband. אמרה לו, יודע צדיק נפש בהמתו. The tzaddik takes care of his animals. It's a very... Why this pasuk? She could have said something else, saying that someone who cares dearly for you will know what you need, but she uses this pasuk. Maybe because he was a shepherd. So she said that just like a shepherd takes care of his animals, he will take care of me. And then she fell down on the ground and started kissing his feet. And his students were pushing her away. And he said the famous statement, Shivkua, Sheli v'shelachem shelahu. Whatever we have is because of her. Now that we see all four stories in order, the question is as follows. It's a beautiful story, but it seems a little bit out of place. And first of all, in terms of chronology, the first rabbis that we spoke about, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, lived in the first century. In the second century. Then we have Rabbi Hananiah ben Hachinai, who lived in the third century, in 100 years later. Rabbi Hama, the third story, lived another 100 years later. And all of a sudden, we go back in time to someone, Rabbi Akiva, who lived even before Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. He was the master of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's master. So it's out of place. And it seems like the editor of the Gemara, and we don't know exactly what is the historical truth here, but the editor of the Gemara tried to to create a certain frame for the stories. In all stories we have a man who leaves the house for 12 years, he comes back, and there's a certain damage or certain miscommunication that happens between him and his wife. In the first story, she becomes barren. In the second story, she dies. In the third story, he doesn't know she has a son. In the fourth story, the neighbors are not happy with that. The neighbors are creating this kind of contention. You should get divorced. You're a widow. You're a poor woman. And even when she talks about herself, she calls herself an animal. Maybe some kind of criticism of saying that even though it's sort of laudable, it's a good thing that he went to yeshiva, but this is not how she should have been left behind. But the editor of this story wants to tell us that at least of all these rabbis that we've heard about, one of them became very successful in his endeavors to go to the yeshiva. So just interesting to look at how the Gemara built this succession of stories, all in contradiction to the original statement that a rabbi or Talmid Chacham, even though he goes to learn in the yeshiva, is not allowed to leave his house for more than a week without the consent of the woman, and even when he goes for more than that, he should keep in touch with her and take care of her. So yes.